Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context driven. Okay, in this session, we're beginning to do a few studies in the book of Hebrews, and this is how the book of Hebrews opens up in your Greek text with polumeros kai polutropos, polaihotheos, lalesos tois patrasin en tois prophetais ep eskatu hemeron tuton elalesen hemin en huio. And that is in many, I guess we would say, portions, in many ways of old God has spoken to the fathers by means of the prophets. At the last of these days, he has spoken to us by means of a son. And there is no article here before huio, or there's no autu after huio to say the son or his son. It just literally means by means of a son. And that's done for emphasis, and we'll discuss this a little bit later. But the author of the book of Hebrews very eloquently opens up this book with a very stylistic sentence. And I guess the first sentence goes on for like the first four verses, which would be the complete Prooemium for the book of Hebrews. Now, moving on to book of Hebrews, just I guess we have to do some sort of introduction to the book. Most authors are kind of beyond the pale of trying to identify who the author is. It's kind of, we've given up on that. And there are still scholars who are trying to take a stab or a guess at it. I suppose it's not wrong, but and I think the latest one is Cockrell in his commentary. But anyhow, William Lane here is pretty mainstream. We are just going with an anonymous author for the book of Hebrews when it's all done and said. And he has this to say: the limits of historical knowledge preclude positive identification of the writer. No firm tradition concerning his identity exists from the earliest period. He was clearly known to the community to whom he wrote. We can see that in 1319. The brief personal notes in chapter 13, however, are not sufficiently specific to establish his identity. While the use of the masculine pronoun in referring to the writer is advisable in light of the formulation in 1132, Hebrews is anonymous. Although the writer is presumably within the Pauline circle and expects to travel with Timothy, our brother, mentioned in 1323, it is certain that he is not Paul, but one who was numbered himself among those to whom the immediate hearers of the Lord had delivered the gospel. And that's pretty much the death knell to identifying Paul as the author. Is if you look at chapter 2, verses 3 to 4, the author definitely identifies himself in a way which Paul would not. So that this is why today scholars pretty much abandon trying to identify this. Now, it is true, he kind of paints a broad brush here, William Lane, that is. A lot of the early church did posit a Pauline a Pauline authorship for this particular book, especially with the phrase to the Hebrews, and that would be the title being attached to this in about almost just right before 200. And anyhow, it was, if there was any one person this particular writing has been attached to, it has been Paul. But I think it's advisable that we abandon Pauline authorship for the letter based upon chapter 2, verses 3 to 4, because the author squarely identifies himself as a second generation Christian, and Paul would not identify himself in such a way that as the author of Hebrews has done so in chapter 2, verse 3. We'll look at that a little bit closer later. But this is pretty much if you pick up any standard commentary or New Testament introduction, this is what that they will say. And if we go to Origen, an early church father, he's going to say something very similar. And this is being quoted by Eusebius. For my own part, if I may state my opinion, I should say that the thoughts are the apostles, but the style and composition are the work of someone who called to mind the apostles' teaching and wrote short notes, as it were, on what his master said. If any church then regards the epistle as Paul's, let it be commended on this score. For it was not for nothing that the men of old have handed it down to us as Paul's. But as to who actually wrote the epistle, God knows the truth of the matter. According to the account which has reached us, some say that the epistle was written by Clement, who became bishop of the Romans. Others, as it was written by Luke, the writer of the Gospel and Acts. And that's pretty much, Origen's thoughts are pretty standard even today. And so he says, but who actually wrote the epistle? Only God knows the truth of the matter. And so we're going to probably leave it there with Origen of Alexandria here, because to just go through, there's been 13 different authors. People, try to pin this on, and it could be Barnabas or Apollos, and Paul, and it just goes on and on and on from there. Luke, Clement, and so on and so forth. But and it would be nice to know who did it. It is someone within the Pauline circle, as we can see from chapter 13. So we could actually, if we knew who the author was, it would probably be a name that we would all know, since it was somebody who was close friends with Timothy. Okay. Now, coming here to Clement of Rome, and this is having something to do with the date of the epistle to the Romans, and this was written in about 96, so right towards the close of the first century. And First Clement says, "This is the way, beloved, in which we find our salvation, i.e., Jesus Christ, the high priest and our offering, the leader and helper of our weaknesses, through whom we gaze into the heights of heaven. Through this one we gaze in a mirror at his blamelessness and the pinnacle of his appearance. Through this one the eyes of our hearts were opened. Through this one, our lack of understanding and our darkened minds have sprung again to the light. Through this one, the Master desired us to taste of the immortal knowledge, who is the apaugasma, okay? The apaugosma, that is the radiance of his majestic, of his majesty, to such a one who is so much greater than the angels, as much as he has inherited a superior name. For it is written in this manner, the one who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. But unto the Son, or unto his Son, in this manner, excuse me, the Master said, You are my Son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the world your possession. Again he says to him, Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool of your feet. So anyhow, I mean, that's kind of my roughshod translation here of 1 Clement chapter 36. But you can see by looking at this, especially here at verse 2, where it says that he is definitely quoting the book of Hebrews, who is the radiance of his majesty, and he is so much greater than the angels, as much as he has inherited a greater name. This is quoting right out of the book of Hebrews, and all the scholars and everybody has known this, and this is actually why Origen said that some people have even suggested that Clement of Rome had written the epistle. But it's clear here that he's not only quoting, he's quoting all kinds of passages in the New Testament here, but mainly a very dense collection here from 2, 3, 4, and 5, these last verses here of the first chapter of the book of Hebrews. So what's important about this witness of 1 Clement chapter 36 is that it establishes that a date, excuse me, I got something stuck in my throat, that a date can be established that the book of Hebrews was definitely written well before AD 96, well within the first century. So this is a major textual evidence that we have for dating the book of Hebrews, and this is very important, and it would be well for you to remember that. Okay, coming here to F.F. Bruce, one of the premier leading scholars of just the past generation, and pretty much I'd be in agreement with what he's trying to say here. He's saying this, a first century date is required by the internal evidence, the near quotation of the Epistle of Clement of Rome about AD 96. And that's just what I just got done quoting. And by the internal evidence according to which the author and presumably his readers came to know the gospel from people who themselves had listened to the teaching of Jesus. This is chapter 2, verse 3. If Timothy, whose release is announced in chapter 13, as it seems likely Paul's junior colleague of that name, a date within his active lifetime is indicated. But as we do not know when Timothy was born, he was considerably younger than Paul and may have been out of his teens when Paul co-opted him as a fellow missionary in AD 49, or when he died. This does not help us much. If the epistle was sent to Rome, it would have been dated before the persecution of AD 64. The view tentatively adopted in this commentary is that the epistle was written in Rome in about AD 64. And that's pretty much what I would basically agree with, because after 64 AD is when you have the persecution of Nero, and there's so there's going to be chaos in Rome, and martyrdom, and the book says that you haven't suffered unto martyrdom, you haven't unto the shedding of blood. We'll see this. I believe that's chapter 11. So F.F. Bruce here, and he's following tradition here, which is spot on. And so basically a date of somewhere right just before 64 AD would be required for this. And obviously we'll see, maybe we'll talk about 70 AD as well. Now, looking here at Paul Ellingworth, another very, very good conservative scholar, says this about the destination. The crucial question is that the interpretation of hoi apates Italios, in 1324, assuming this to be part of the original epistle, it may mean either those in Italy, the Italians, or two, those who come from Italy, implying that they have left their place of origin. One is not linguistically impossible, but two gives the more natural sense for apa. If therefore hoi apates Italios refers to the people from rather than in Italy, refers to the people from rather than in Italy, somewhere in Italy is the most likely destination. Within this area, the most important church, and therefore the most likely destination, was Rome. The place at which Hebrews was written could be any place to which groups of Italians are known to have traveled or were likely to do so. The fact that Clement of Rome quotes Hebrews supports Rome as the most likely destination. And I guess pretty much this would be pretty standard. It was with, at least within my circles of fellow scholars, this is pretty much how I have traditionally, and my colleagues have traditionally attributed the destination of this letter. It would be having been sent to Rome. Looking here at Cockrell, who followed F.F. Bruce in updating the New International Commentary, he says that Hebrews appears between Romans and 1 Corinthians in P46, a collection of Pauline epistles dated about 200 AD. So you're going to see that within some different lists of canonical books of the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, where it appears within the canonical list, is not after Philemon, but it is in between Romans and 1 Corinthians. So that would indicate that the earliest tradition would have maintained that Paul was the author, but everybody still held loosely to it, as we saw that we saw Origen, his earlier statement that we saw here, Origen of Alexandria. And so it was always kind of wishy-washy, but definitely after Augustine, it was settled that basically the letter, it has canonical status, but as who wrote it, he's going to double down with Origen that the author is unknown, but the book is definitely canonical, and would carry some sort of apostolic authority, and it just the message of the book, it does carry that type of authority. So it is to be noted that in some of the earliest canons, that it appears within the Pauline corpus. It already bears the title to the Hebrews in this manuscript. In Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, the great codices from the 4th and 5th centuries, Hebrews occurs after Paul's letters to churches, but before his letter to individual persons. Beginning with the 6th century Codex Claromontanus, Hebrews assumes the place it has in most contemporary English Bibles after the letters of Paul. That is, after Philemon. The earliest known use of Hebrews was in the Western Roman Empire, where it was quoted and echoed in 1st Clement, written from Rome around the end of the 1st century. So this is Cockerell's his comments here, and I'm just letting you know that different people have different strokes, and it's good to know though that that Hebrews has been placed within the canon variously in different places within the early church. Okay, and I guess we should say something here about the literary genre. The end of the epistle says this is it's a letter of exhortation, and this is just the genre that people are going to give it. It's a writing of exhortation. So that bears with it, and a lot of people want to say that they want to look at Barnabas, that he's the son of exhortation or consolation. This is a letter of consolation or exhortation. It's the same word, and as what the apostle said of Barnabas's name meant back there in the book of Acts. Anyhow, this is just something for you to know, but definitely the looking at a literary genre for this particular style of writing in this epistle, I guess it would be a message of exhortation. Now, remember, this book doesn't open up with a typical salutation and prayer and who the author is and who exactly the addressees are, like most of Paul's epistles do. But Hebrews is anonymous in that fashion, and we are going to leave the authorship also anonymous in this. But we're definitely looking at Hebrews as a solidly a canonical book with full authority. Okay, I guess now coming to the beginning of the epistle in this Prooemium, I guess it would be standard here to explain my structural analysis. And what I did is the introduction of this Prooemium is standard. It's standard with most scholars to understand this as one big long sentence, verses 1 through 4. And I have broken this down into a tripartite manner. And the first, the conceptual analysis of the first, I guess the first part is going to be verses 1 and 2. And the reason for that is because God is the subject of the verbs. He is the one who's speaking in verses 1 and 2. A lot of scholars would just break it off at 1 or at 2b in this last clause where it says Ella lesin Haman en huio. He has spoken to us by means of a son. and they would typically stop it there, because that is a unit. Verses 1 and 2 is a clearly defined unit, but it shouldn't end the macro structure. Part 2 of that structure should contain the rest of verse 2, because God is the one who's still speaking. When you come to verse 3, now the Son, Christ, becomes the subject of the verb. Now he is now has the nominative dominion, so to speak, over the verb, and he's the one who's speaking. So it would be natural that God is going to be the main driving force behind verses 1 and 2, since he's the subject, and he is the one who is speaking through different means, whether it be the prophets of old or by means of the Son, or a Son. We'll explain the reason for the anarthrous style of that, and there's reasons for that. But anyhow, I wanted to explain the structural analysis. So under this tripart structure, the first part, you can see here that I divided it into 2 parts. Number 1, God's message through the Son, and then number 2, God's message through the Son as heir and creator. That would be the second part in verse 2c to d, just the second half of verse 2, and that's important structurally and conceptually, because really basically structural analysis is really conceptual analysis. You're conceptualizing the hierarchy of a text, and then you are making hierarchical structures based upon the points underscored, and not to say that mine is it's just my most responsible structural analysis at the present time. I think that would be a good way to state how scholars go about doing our business. We're just giving a responsible reason for what we're doing. Okay, so what's really important here is that this is really highly stylistic. He opens up with these a series of 3 different adverbs that I'm going to divide into 2 groups. So if you look here at my structural analysis here, at verse 1 here, God's message, and that is through the prophets in the old dispensation. Now, I'm not a dispensationalist, so I'm just it's a good term to use here. Please don't mistake me. I'm not a dispensationalist. Never have been. But the word works really good here. But I needed to explain myself that I'm not a dispensationalist. So that's the focus here of verse 1. God's message through the prophets in the old dispensation. Now, this is point A, and this is going to be contrasted with God's message through the Son in the new dispensation. Okay, that's very, very important. So structural analysis is very key in how we do this. So once you get the macro structure and the micro structures set, the macro structure would be here verses 1 and 2. All right, and then it's like, well, then how do we divide up verses 1 and 2? Well, then you look at verse 1, and as you read it, you notice this whole section here. But then it's being contrasted. There's a contrast here being stated in the superiority, and there's continuity here with God's message through the Son. And it's in a new dispensation. So now then we have, okay, so we can see that verse 1 itself is a clearly defined unit. And it's to be played off, through verse 2, part A and B. And once you see that, then the whole structure comes alive. And then what you want to do, once you got that, you can say, okay, now is there anything else how we can break down verse 1? And so when you look here at verse 1, and you actually look down here at the text, polumeros kai polutropos. Okay, we're going to look at this and we're going to go, okay, this adverbial phrase, we're going to want to, let's look at that as a unit. Okay, and then we got another adverb here, polai. So we're going to divide that up. Now we have God is our subject. We have an aorist participle here and a participial phrase finishing this off, and that's going to provide us with our verb, who the message is to the audience is patrosin, to the fathers, and then we have here a dative prepositional phrase of means, by means of the prophets. And so this is how we would look at this sentence. And then what I did was I came here and I looked at, okay, well, the qualities are the quantities and the qualities of past revelation. And so this is going to look at polumeros kai polutropos. All right, so polumeros, meros means part or portions, piecemeal, it's quantities, how revelation was given piecemeal throughout the prior dispensation. Okay, it came in many different portions or downloads. It came in piecemeal here and there. It came in different quantities. Okay, so hence we have quantities and then qualities of past revelation. So what's the quality? Well, this is polutropos in many ways. So I mean, if you look at Ezekiel, okay, we got a guy that sees some pretty radical visions. He's taken out of his body. Okay, there are just so many different ways that God speaks. He speaks through dreams. He speaks through visions. He speaks through audible voices. There's just many different ways that God has spoken. All right, and so you need to look at this, that we have polu. It starts with a with pi here, in polumeros and polutropos, another pi, polai, another pi. We got patrosin, another pi, prophetais, another pi, or someone would say p or whatever. The as far as the p sound in Greek, this is he is using this sonorously to, and if you hear this in Greek, it picks up, and it's nicely stated, and this is probably the most grandeur sentence in the New Testament. That's what a lot of scholars would say. But I'm explaining here structural analysis or conception, which is conceptual analysis. So we're looking at the text. You need to divide it up, every thought, as much as you can, and try to make sense of it in some type of structure. Okay, so this is what I have done. So this polumeros kai polutropos, I have entitled Quantities and Qualities of Past Revelation. And then we have a temporal clause with polai. So long ago, God has spoken in many portions, in many ways, to the fathers by means of the prophets. Okay, so we have a temporal clause, and we put this as protological. Now that's going to be in contrast to eschatological. Okay, because we're going to also have another temporal clause in the comparative adverse, or not the comparative next part of this opening statement, God's superior message through the Son. But I'm just letting you know how to divide this down. So we had the temporal clause long ago. We have the audience. It's to the fathers. That is the covenant family. And then the mediation of revelation. God spoke through the prophets. Okay? En tois prophetais. So we have this prepositional phrase here. And that is, he spoke by means of the prophets. And he did this in many portions, in many ways. Long ago, he spoke to the fathers by means of the prophets. Now get this. Now, here in verse 2, at the end of these days, okay, here's your temporal clause, he has spoken to us by means of a son. So we have an audience, it's us, he spoke to us now this is being read off of the audience before in the prior covenant, which was to the fathers. So you need to look here at Haman. It is being directly contrasted with tois patrasin. Okay, these two are in contrast. All right, with it, that's the audience. Now the temporal clause is also in play here, and upon the last of these days, well, this is being played off of here of polai, long ago. So in the past, that is long ago, this is how God spoke. Okay, and then by means of the prophets, and now that's being contrasted with here, and huio, by means of a son. Okay, now you probably don't like that translation, but we don't have to, a dative article in front of huio, and nor do we have autu, okay, that coming after huio. All right, that's not a part of the text. So the text just says by means of a son. Now, if once you see the term son, this just means this is just a code word for king or for kingship. Okay, that's all it is. Because even this particular verse here is going to the last half is going to be an allusion here to Psalm 2:7. Even that's Psalm 2:7 is exactly what Clement of Rome quoted. He added in Psalm 2:7 to play off of this, whom he appointed heir of all things. He just went to Psalm 2:7 and took it from there. And then we have this genitive here phrase dihu through whom also he created the ages, or we're just going to translate the world, or the worlds. And that we'll see this again in chapter 11, this type of creation of the world, and using the word ionos. That will be used there as well. What I wanted to do here was specifically explain structural analysis. Now notice some of your translations here in verse 2, they're gonna start with the word but, or some such verb, connective here that would be adversative in nature, but it's not there. But upon the last of these days, he has spoken to us by means of a son. And so we are going to, this is loaded theologically, and it takes us back to Psalm 2, and the author is going to take us to Psalm 110. And we'll know that son is connected with kingship, and that's what son here refers to. So it is definitely something that does not belong to the office of prophet. It belongs to the office of kingship, and that goes straight back to 1 Samuel chapter 7 or 2 Samuel chapter 7, where where God says, I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. This is how Nathan spoke to David about Solomon, and also for the Davidic kings of the Davidic dynasty, all of the kings were viewed as sons, and so Psalm 2 was like a coronation psalm for the kings. That would have been spoken by the prophet, or the high priest, as a part of the coronation of anointing a new Davidic king to take the throne in succession. Okay, hopefully that I explained this sufficiently, but it's important here that by even stating here God's superior message through the Son, it's superior to what? It's to the prophets of the old dispensation, which is going to be compared to the Son in the new dispensation. Now, as far as this point A, the quantities and qualities of past revelation, that part is overlooked. That doesn't have a part here to play in 2A to B, but just the temporal clause, audience, and mediation. These B, C, and D are going to have their relationship mirrored in A, B, and C here. Temporal clause, audience, mediation. You'll see that. So actually, the first point is not reduplicated here. And we're not to say that when God spoke in the past that's old and bad, and now God spoke through the Son. It doesn't. We don't want to diminish what God said in the past. Of course, it's more authoritative, and the message is more important for us in the new dispensation. But remember, if you got a 2-story house, you don't get to the upstairs portion except by means of the first floor. So the prophets are going to be, the Old Testament is basically the first floor of the house, and you got to go through them to get up to the stairs, to get to where God has finished his his revelation in this dispensation that we're in the end times, by speaking through means of the Son. And so this text, this first verses 1 through 2b, what we just looked at, it's very tight. It all corresponds to one another. There's a lot in it. So I did want to make sure that we understood this. Upon the last of these days. So this is the eschatological portion, and then that's so I'm following here. I believe Attridge here, and in following his use of the term protological. So if eschatological is the end times message, well, the prior message in the dispensation past is going to be the protological message, so to speak. So I want you to see that the author is definitely has very structured, very tightly contrasted words and phrases between the prior dispensation and then the new eschatological present dispensation that we're in with the Son, and how God has spoken. So that is just it's just awesome when you can see this. Then the whole text breaks down and you can understand the structure. Okay, now looking here at the last part of this verse, we have another clause here, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds. So God is still speaking here. So I kept this as point 2 underneath God's superior message through the Son. So God's message through the Son as heir and creator. So what this is saying is that God has appointed him heir of all things, and okay, but you got to look at this verse here, because Jesus is the one who made all things. Okay, so Jesus is the means by which God created the world. So we can see this. You go back to what John, John's Gospel in verse 3. Okay, that Jesus was also the means of creation. And, you just go back to Genesis, 1:26, and God said, let us make man in our image. I'm not made in the image of angels, and neither are you. Okay? And some of these angelic creatures can, some of them got 4 heads. Okay? Just go look at the book of Ezekiel, look at a cherub. Okay? Look at seraphim, angels, no, the angels were not a part of creation. They sang and rejoiced when God created. But you and I are made in the image of them, of those guys. Those guys, that's the Trinity, okay? God created us him by means of himself, okay? That is the Trinity, that Christ was the means by which God created the world here. That's what this verse here is stating. And so let us make man in our image according to our likeness. That is us being made by them. And I do say them because Christ is not the Father and the Father is not Christ. We remember we have distinct persons within the Godhead. So maybe you haven't heard it stated that way, but I definitely, when I read the text back in Genesis on page 1, I look at it just like Von Rod did. Let us means us. It's not the angelic host. It's not the heavenly council. I'm sorry, we're made in God's image, and we're honored to be made in God's image. So the one who created all things is also the one who God appointed heir of all things. So you can see how tight these two clauses are. These are very tight clauses. And God is the subject, so therefore that's why this remains within the first unit. That's important. Okay, it's very, very important. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I wanted to bring this up. Now if you were to look at Bruce's commentary, once you come here to 2C and D, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. He's starting from there, and he's going to list these 7 things, the 7 marks of the person and work of the Son. So he states this. Other scholars have followed him. I'm just letting you know this, but I don't incorporate this within my structure. But people have seen that this works, and so I wanted to point this out. That this would definitely have a place in scholarship. That you may also want to see these 7 enumerated clauses here in verses 2c through verse 3. He doesn't include verse 4 here in this number of 7 here. I just wanted to bring this up to you. Okay, now coming here to probably the most important verses here in this Prooemium, particular in verse 3, and 4 rounds it out. Well, let's just look at this. Who being the apaugosma, that is the who is the radiance of his glory and exact representation of his essence, bearing all things by the word of his power, having made a cleansing for sins, he sat at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become so much greater than angels, as much as he has inherited a superior name than they. Okay, now coming to this section, we are going to look here that specifically verse 3 then begins to look at the person of the Son, and that is that's going to be the subject here at first. Notice down here that within this relative clause, who we have this present participle here, who is, and it's going to connect up here with the word te and pharaon. So these clauses here, these participial or participial, the participles here are going to be connected. They're going to be fairly tight, and so this is closely connected to one another. Now, scholars are looking at verse 3 as there's some underlying hymn to that underlies the author's present quotations is coming from some hymn. Now that may or may not be. We have no textual evidence to support that, but the language could point that way, and scholars have noted that. So we'll just say that in passing. So Christ, it says that he is the radiance, this apaugosma, this radiance of God's glory, and the express image, or it's really kind of like if you take a cylinder seal and you were to roll it over clay, it's going to reproduce the image or the impression left from the cylinder seal. And this word character is used in that sense within cylinder seals. So it's just telling us that this verse here is definitely telling us that Christ does share within the nature of divinity, and we can see here why he in verse 4 he wants to make sure that Christ is not just some glorified angel, that he is completely he's divine rather than, that will be developed in verse 5. So verse 4 is going to be a hinge that's going to take us into Christ's superiority over the angels in verses 5 following. But the author of Hebrews wants us to see that here that we're looking at the person of the Son, and his works, which are closely related. So we have first here the radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his nature or essence. This hypostaseos here is probably close to what the later fathers, the ousios, the substance, their essence here. So hypostaseos in this particular verse is very close to what the later church fathers were to confess, that Christ has the homoousios, these of the same essence with the Father, and this verse does seem to be deifying Christ here specifically. So we want to affirm that, and it's closely connected here with this. The nature of Christ here is closely connected to his. Remember, he is the one through whom God created all things, but he's bearing all things by the word of his power, and this is definitely tied to divinity. So the work of the Son maintaining creation is so important here. We'll look here at Harold Attridge for the term hypostasis. Here he says the term for fundamental reality, hypostasis, appears 3 times in Hebrews, with slightly different but overlapping nuances. It does, however, especially in this context, have a philosophical denotation that ultimately derives from Stoicism. That sense developed from the scientific and medical uses for the term for he's going to be talking here about a sediment that collects at the bottom of a bowl or something, or a dish or some glass, right? So he says a medical uses for the term for a sediment that collects at the bottom of and hence stands under hypohistami. It stands under a solution. So this is the sediment that collects at the bottom of a glass. Okay, so if you had some solution and then the heavier elements floated to the bottom, this would be. He is saying that this sense derives from this scientific and medical use, and refers to the stuff that stands under the lighter liquid which is above, and so it says that the term eventually came to refer to whatever underlies a particular phenomenon, whatever is its actuality or its most basic or fundamental reality or essence. And I think essence is where we kind of really want to settle on here. No pun intended. So Christ is of this essence with God. He is this exact representation of his essence, of his nature. Okay, and that's what the author here is trying to get across to us. And then we have this next participial clause here, bearing all things by the word of his power. So this is Christ's continuous, present, active. He's the active force upholding the whole universe, everything, by the word of his power. So Christ is seen here as the ultimate power in the universe here, in relation directly to God the Father. And this is why the New Testament, you just can't. What are you going to say about Jesus? Who is he? He's not a man. He's not an angel. He's equating Jesus with only with divinity. And so the Christian community, rightfully, we confess and believe in the Trinity, and Christ as being the second person of the Godhead. This is definitely being taught here. Now, we have another participial clause here, and here we have poiesamenos, and this is going to be a middle participle. So probably having that middle force, which it's going to be kind of reflexive here, that he himself having made a cleansing for sin. So he's emphasizing that it is, the emphasis is that Christ has done this, himself. So I'm taking it reflexively here, so that he has made this cleansing for sin, which then we come to the main verb, the main verb here, that he sat. Okay, he sat at the right hand of the Majesty on high. So this is obviously an intertextual allusion to Psalm 110, which he will develop later as well. But now this is Christ's exaltation and his exaltation to the right hand of God on high. So the right hand is, to be at the right hand of somebody is to be, he's co-regent. What he's trying to say here, that he's co-regent, and that's going to be definitely, we will see this here with the term anama, okay, which is going to refer to huios. We'll see this. And then we have this comparative sentence, having become so much greater than the angels, as much as he has inherited a superior name than they. And so I think with tosuto here, what we're going to do, not so much as a comparative, but as an intensive. We'll follow Ellingsworth on this, that Christ became so much greater than the angels. Remember this becoming aspect, having become here. Remember that when Christ emptied himself and took on the form of a servant, then it says, then God highly exalted him. This is in Philippians chapter 2. And so this is reflecting some of that same idea here, that having made a cleansing for sin, well, then now he's being exalted, and since he took on the name of basically of humanity, okay, as we see from Philippians, he became, in the very lowest form, he became a slave, okay, and obedient unto death, the death of the cross. So therefore God highly exalted him. So this is, when we look here at genomenos, it's not that Christ is climbing the ladder, the corporate ladder, and he's starting at the bottom and becoming something greater, in the sense of him being transformed from one a lower created being to a higher status, but Christ freely emptied himself, being in the form of God. He didn't count it robbery to be equal with God, but he did this for us, for our sake, so that we could be in union with Christ, so that we can be in Christ. So the hope of glory is Christ living in us, and that's what this Christianity is all about. The life of Christ shining in and through us to the world. That's what our mission is. And Christ came down and became a human through the incarnation, and by his sacrifice, then he has taken on a greater name than the angels, because before he was remember, he became a man. So this is what this becoming here means, or it's an aorist participle here, having become. So he inherits a superior name than they, and so this name here, I don't think we should be talking here in terms of Yahweh here, the Tetragrammaton. Okay, but we're talking about sonship here. And so when Christ is sitting at the right hand, he is co-regent. So Christ is the co-regent with God, and he's co-reigning with God over the universe. That's what this all means, and that's the greater name. As you can see from verse 1, where at the end of these days, God has spoken to us by means of a son, and that is this name. It's the sonship. It's this sonship equals kingship. That's what it means. It stems directly from the book of Samuel. So that there is where you need to go with Samuel 7:14. There where Nathan gives the prophecy that God will be a father to the Davidic monarchs, and that they will be a son to him. And so this is where this whole theology is developed here, and it comes to a head in Christ. And this is this Prooemium, and basically when you begin to meditate on the Prooemium, the elements of the Prooemium is what the whole letter is going to then reflect later on. Christ, I don't know what happened there. Let me get back here. There we go. Hopefully that didn't ruin anything. Okay, well, I believe we'll be done here. Okay.